I'm particularly impressed at the increasing status of the Arab citizen in Israel. This has worried me, and I've sometimes been critical about what has been done in this regard in the name of, and often in the sincere interest of, security, because of the tensions that Israel's been subjected to. But the new steps which have been taken to increase the status of the Arab citizen, who, generally speaking, has more chance for education and health and whatnot than any other, than most Arabs, at least in the Middle East, shows that there is a real intent to be a democracy for all citizens, a real intent to prove up on the promises, the high hopes, indeed, that have been behind the whole cause of Israel. We Americans have a particular concern here because in the Middle East, things are very doubtful when we look at the future. To have a bulwark of a democratic society that cares for the things we care for may prove to be very important to us. It already is, but may prove to be increasingly important to us. But, of course, we want the well-being and welfare of all the Arab nations there, too, and therefore we should hope for peace, which will enable Israel, instead of being a kind of rock of offense to the other nations there, to be a kind of beacon light and guide. As to what can be done with desert lands, what can be done with a wide variety of peoples, of different levels of education, to move very rapidly toward an educated citizenry, a democratic society, and a fruitful kind of life for all the people within the borders of a given nation. I know of the feeling of many Arab leaders toward Israel. I've talked to some of them. I hope the day comes when they, too, will feel that a blessing has come in their midst, as I feel a blessing has come into the world in the past 10 years of the history of Israel.
Thank you, Dean Pike. Now, let us hear from the Reverend Dr. Eugene Carson Blake.
I am very happy indeed to join in the celebration of the 10th anniversary of the independence of the State of Israel. This state, in this brief 10 years, has proved itself to be one of the forces looking toward freedom and order in our world. I suppose it's no use closing our eyes or our minds to the political hazards that are real in the Middle East today. I do feel, however, that despite the many unanswered questions, that all of us here in America should bring our congratulations to the progress so far made by the State of Israel, by its people and its leaders. All of the world needs to recognize the fact of the existence of this new modern state, built, however, upon the traditions of her religion, which go back and are a part of the foundation of the heritage of the whole Western world. Israel exists, and yet in the Middle East there are forces which would either deny that existence or pledge themselves to make it not be true. I think we should remind ourselves that Israel met a great human need in its existence. After World War II, where all over Europe there had been great persecution of the Jewish people, it was this new hope on the horizon that gave new life to those who survived the tyrannies that came from the Nazi regime. Furthermore, Israel has from the beginning and does now repeat its desire to be a state based upon the principles of liberty, and I'm quoting from her own Declaration of Independence, based on the principles of liberty, justice, and peace as conceived by the prophets of Israel, will uphold the full social and political equality of all its citizens without distinction of religion, race, or sex, will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, education, and culture, will safeguard the holy places of all religions. I am happy to say that I believe that the peace of the Near East depends upon the continued existence of this state based upon this kind of principle. The Near East needs what Israel can bring to it in its economic, political, and idealistic development. all efforts toward understanding the tensions that are across the borders ought to be made. It is not enough that there be a cold peace or anything less than the full recognition of the necessity for neighbors to work together, even though there have been resentments due to the histories of the past. All creative efforts, therefore, to make for a justice and a peace and a creative development in the whole area are that which all of us should look for and pray for. And I trust and hope that in this anniversary, all Americans and all of those who are interested in the state of Israel will pledge themselves to try to find the creative solution that will bring a true peace, not only to Israel, but to all her neighbors. For based upon justice and belief in the providence of God, there can be found a way to adjust all difficulties if men are willing to find the way of righteousness. May God bless all those who are looking in this way to the triumph of order and freedom in the Middle East.
Let us sing a psalm of thanksgiving. Mizmor letodah, hariu laRoshem kol haaretz.
Acclaim the Lord with joy, all the earth.
Ivedu et Aroshem b'simcha.
Serve the Lord with gladness.
Hodu lo, baruchu shamo.
Give thanks unto him, and bless his name.
Ki tov Aroshem leolam chazdo, ve'ad dor vador emunato.
For the Lord is good, his loving kindness endureth forever, and his faithfulness unto all generations.
Not in a long time has the American people been so conscious of the primacy of spiritual values. The crisis in which the world finds itself today is primarily a spiritual crisis, and we know it, the crisis of the race between science and catastrophe. Never before were moral and spiritual directives more imperative in the strategy of survival. So I want to discuss Israel's 10th anniversary from that viewpoint. There is a deep spiritual kinship between the young democracy, Israel, and the older democracy, the United States of America. This affirmation is perhaps the most significant overtone of the American celebration of Israel's 10th anniversary. The spiritual foundations of American democracy, namely the concept of the dignity of man and the sacredness of human life, and the ideals of human freedom and equality under God, embodied in laws and social institutions, these stemmed from the Bible, Israel's ancient, timeless text for the guidance of the social order. This is a community of history, but there is also a community of destiny. In our contemporary world, riven between the democratic way of life and the way of totalitarianism and dictatorship, modern Israel, strategically situated between East and West, is a valiant exponent of democracy in daily practice under difficult conditions. Its qualitative value is out of all proportion to its size. If the United States takes seriously the obligations and commitments which attach to its position as the leader of the democracies, then its commitment to Israel's viability is inescapable. Hence, our government's oft-repeated declaration that the preservation of Israel is an integral part of American foreign policy is inherent in the very essence of our being. The proposition has its compelling corollaries. Economic aid is one. The safeguarding of Israel's physical security against aggression is another. 10 years is but a moment in the life of a nation, yet it is a crucial moment. The first 10 years are the hardest. The first 10 years in the history of the United States, as historians tell us, were fraught with uncertainty and hazard due to economic hardship, internal dissension, and external pressures. Israel's first decade, with all its hardships and dangers, stands favorable comparison with the initial decade in the history of any new nation, the United States included. My most recent visit to Israel, which was only a few weeks ago, has left one impression above all others. The Israelis are planning the next decade. They are planning for the 3rd million of population to consist in the main of new immigrants in quest of home, dignity, and freedom. They are planning for the increase of absorptive capacity, not by expansion of territory, but by agricultural and industrial expansion within its present borders. They are planning for helpful cooperation with any and every underdeveloped state which can make use of its skills and experience, such as they are now extending to Ghana and to Burma. And they will continue to hold out the hand of peace to their neighbors, hoping that one day Israel will become a vitalizing factor for a revitalized Middle East.
And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people. And he will set up an ensign for the nations, and will assemble the dispersed of Israel, and gather together the scattered of Judah from the 4 corners of the earth.
For Israel, a Thanksgiving. You have heard a special program featuring religious leaders Dr. Israel Goldstein, chairman of the Committee for Israel's 10th anniversary celebration. The Reverend Dr. Eugene Carson Blake, stated clerk of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church. Bishop G. Bromley Oxnam, Methodist Bishop of the Washington area. Dr. Reinhold Niebuhr, Vice President of the Faculty of the Union Theological Seminary, New York. His Eminence Michael, Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church of North and South America, and the Very Reverend James A. Pike, Dean of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York.
Transcribed music from the CSAC Transcription Library has been used by permission of the American Federation of Musicians, James C. Petrillo, President.
David Ross was heard as the prophet. For Israel, a Thanksgiving was produced by Saul Carson. Your announcer, Chet Gould.